Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячий хотар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1085 of the War News stream. And today we have massive news. Another Russian drone has struck a NATO territory in Romania today, and a shocking event. Also, Israel's preparing for strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, and Belarus was attacked by a Russian kamikaze drone today, resulting in it being shot down. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we've gotten significant news that it appears that a Russian drone has actually, apparently several of them, stricken the area around the city of Gomel within the southeastern area of the Republic of Belarus, while we've also been able to hear additional information that some drones have also apparently once again hit the nation of Romania overnight as the Russian Federation was launching a massive drone and missile attack on the state of Ukraine. This comes as news is beginning to emerge from the state of Israel that the state of Israel is now preparing to strike the Islamic Republic of Iran's nuclear weapons research and development sites to be able to destroy them once and for all, and to deny the Islamic Republic of Iran's government the access to weapons of mass destruction through their research and development capabilities. We have also been able to get some impressively, at least in-depth news, I'm not really sure if it's good or not, about the Syrian interim government, and we'll be getting to that in a little bit later tonight, but I have to say that it appears that the Syrian interim government may be developing in a somewhat interesting way, perhaps not the best of ways, but we'll get into that. Nevertheless, we have also been able to hear some news that in Ramstein, we have been able to hear that U.S. military support, U.S. military aid will be continuing to Ukraine in the future. However, we have been also able to get some additional statements as well about diplomatic developments that have been going on today in between the United States, the Russian Federation, and the state of Ukraine that some people have been saying is not really that good. Others have been saying it appears that it's just about time. But we will be going into that a little bit later on tonight and talking about that in a little bit more detail, because there is a lot to unpack with that story, and it doesn't really seem like there is a interesting kind of an outcome to that, at least at the moment. But nevertheless, we are going to be getting into the major news of tonight, and we were able to hear of some incredibly major things. But also, really quickly, I would like to make sure that we keep this in mind for some people. We actually have gotten a statement from just a moment ago in the chat that apparently there is some sort of a possible revolution that's going on in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We haven't heard anything about that. Matthew, if you could try and look around and scour around for any information on that to tell us whether that's actually happening or not. They said that it appears that it just started happening moments ago. So I'm not really sure if that is just happening right now or not. But once again, that is a rumor in the chat at this point. We don't really have any corroboration or video or picture evidence to back that up. So at this moment, we're going to continue on with our news cycle as normal, covering all of the news that we already have. And if there is a major event happening inside of Iran currently, we will be moving on to cover that immediately on air. But moving on from that and into the major news that we were able to hear about, that we do have on the map right now, we were able to see that apparently the Russian Federation, in their missile and drone attack last night, not only targeted the state of Ukraine and ended up having a couple of drones go errant into the area of Romania, but it also appears that around the city of Gomel, some Russian drones actually exploded around the city perimeter. We were actually able to see one of these drones apparently being engaged by Belarusian air defense and being shot down before it could actually hit the town below. And here's one of those clips. We can see the Russian drone right there falling to the ground, as massive amounts of reports were also surfacing from around the area of Gomel that explosions were being reported, and it appeared that Russian drones had actually mistakenly hit the city of Gomel instead of a Ukrainian city, possibly the target that they were actually looking for, which was Chernihiv. Chernihiv and Gomel are about an equal distance from the Ukrainian border to each other and are somewhat similar in size and also their road structure. They both have major ring highways to the western perimeter of the city, and that may have confused some Russian drone pilots, and instead of flying to Chernihiv, all of them flew towards Gomel and started to attempt to hit targets that look somewhat similar to what may have existed inside of Chernihiv. It appears that the Belarusian air defense at the moment may have appeared to have not really worked too well. We are hearing that there were multiple explosions around the city. We haven't gotten any video or picture evidence of damage on the ground yet, but it does appear that the Russian Federation has conducted an incredibly large incident of friendly fire onto one of the larger cities that's in the entirety of Belarus. Once again showing us that the Russian Federation's drone attack abilities are actually beginning to degrade as the war goes on, and it appears that the accuracy and efficacy of Russian drone forces is diminishing. We were also able to hear
also, by the way, the attack vector is kind of interesting. Where did it hit in Belarus again? Can you show me on the map just real quick?
Around the southeastern area near to the city of, as they call it now, Gomel, but at the beginning of the war, it used to be called Gomel.
Interesting. So, like, where did Russia launch these from for it to actually risk going into Belarus like that? Do we know that piece of information?
From what we understand, the drones were most likely launched from somewhere within Oriel and were flying on their way into Ukraine, most likely trying to skirt around Belarus and around the northern border, and then probably come down the Sea of Kiev, which is along the Dnipro River, and then strike into Kiev directly, or their target may have been Chernihiv.
Interesting. That's kind of weird that they would like take that attack vector right there, because of course they know that Belarus will shoot down stuff that comes in their airspace, as they did with that one. So I wonder if Russia simply didn't notify Belarus they were going to be using that corridor to attack Kyiv, or maybe there was some type of errant drone going in here. But that's kind of weird. They shot it down with air defense. That seems rather extreme.
It does seem rather extreme, and that's also coming on to the fact that we did get on-the-ground reports that apparently drones were exploding onto the territory of Belarus, possibly hitting what they believed were their targets in Chernihiv or Kyiv. We're not entirely sure what the Russian pilots of these drones were thinking they were hitting, but we didn't get any video or picture evidence actually showing us any explosions on the ground in Gomel. We just got the one showing that the air defense did successfully shoot down one of the Russian drones that was flying into Gomel and appearing to target the city. This is not the first time that we've seen such an incident occur. In the past, however, we've never seen Russian drones actually supposedly hit targets inside the city of Gomel. In the past, we have seen that these drones have flown over Gomel, and Belarusian air defense engaged and shot down practically all of them, but we've never heard at this point the rumors that some of them actually did hit within the area around the city of Gomel. This is the first time that that's ever been reported, and for this reason, we are largely assuming that that information is most likely true, especially considering that we did get video and picture evidence to confirm that they were shooting down the drones over Gomel. This is the largest drone-friendly fire incident that we've ever seen so far in the war from the Russian side, and it does appear that once again their attacks are getting a little bit more tricky to pull off. It seems as though they may be losing abilities or technical skill to be able to actually navigate these drones properly to their targets inside of Ukraine. And that wasn't the issue just in Belarus. It appears that that was also the issue in Romania as well, as we were able to hear that another drone may have crashed on Romanian territory, and we were able to get a statement from the Romanian government right down here, and also, I believe, B&O News Agency about what happened. But nevertheless, at least one Russian drone violated Romanian/NATO airspace, according to Romania's defense ministry. One of the drones may have crashed on Romanian territory, and a search will be carried out in the morning. At this moment, the morning is beginning to rise over Romania at this very moment. And so probably over the course of the stream, the search party will be able to find the crashed drone. And this is once again another Russian drone that has violated the territorial integrity of NATO. Once again, another drone that has crashed onto NATO territory, onto Romanian sovereign territory. And it appears that the Romanian Ministry of Defense will be going out and finding that drone here within the next few hours. Nevertheless, it does appear that multiple incidents occurred, once again showing us that Russian drones are beginning to really spill out of Ukraine's borders in practically every single direction. Not even really targeting NATO directly itself any longer, but also targeting Belarus as well, which is Russia's only ally within the entirety of Eastern Europe at this point. It's a little bit of a wild thing to look at that, and it's something to say that we've never really seen this a lot in the war. I would have to say that I believe that the Russian Federation is most likely starting to run into some massive issues in getting skilled pilots for the drones, and I don't really know why, because as far as attritional rates of these kinds of kamikaze drone pilots, it's not incredibly high from what we understand. We really haven't even heard of any of these kamikaze drones being, well, the pilots at least, being targeted and destroyed by the Ukrainians before they get launched another drone, or if they were in the process of flying a drone. So largely what we can only attribute this to is a lack of skill in the Russian drone forces to be able to fly these drones properly and have them hit the necessary targets inside of Ukraine. Still, a lot of people have been throwing in their 2 cents on what they believe about these Russian drone attacks, especially the ones around Gomel, where the Belarusian air defense was visibly seen shooting down more Russian drones. And not only that, we've once again gotten rumors, the first time we've ever heard, that some of these drones appear to have actually dived onto their targets and successfully hit them within Gomel, which obviously is not the target that the Russians were going for. And a lot of people are putting in their thoughts on this currently, and loads of people are saying that it appears that it was an errant drone from the Russian Federation. It simply just veered off course by, say, 30 miles or so, and then they just decided that Gomel was the target and started trying to hit Gomel. Others are saying that the Russians failed to notify Belarus of the drone incursions that would be occurring temporarily as they tried to skirt their way through Belarusian airspace and down towards Kyiv from the northern side. Others are saying that maybe it wasn't Russian drones, and maybe it was drones of another kind, and some are a little bit unsure and undecided, but loads of people are throwing in their opinions and their ideas on what exactly was happening with these Russian drones that appear to have actually hit Belarus earlier today. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so it looks like 57% of the audience said it was an errant drone from Russia that went out of control, while 28% said Russia probably failed to notify Belarus of the launches, and 4% said maybe it was not a Russian drone and maybe it was someone else's drone. And based on what we know right now, it sounds like it was most likely an errant Russian drone. This is not the first time this would have happened, but it looks like this time Belarus did not have any notification of the drone flight through their territory, and they decided to play it safe and shoot it down with their air defense systems. So it makes you wonder, why did Russia not contact Belarus to let them know it was coming through like they would typically do, so that way this wouldn't happen, which is kind of odd to me that didn't actually take place, the communication between the Russian authorities and the Belarusian authorities. So it makes you wonder why this happened. And honestly, I do not have a good explanation for it. So I'm going to be with the 58% that said it was probably an errant drone, but that's a pretty far ways off to simply be errant. Kind of odd. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it most likely was an errant drone, but it was egregiously errant. If we were to assume that it was near the Ukrainian border or skirting around the northern Ukrainian border area to try and get by some air defense, that means that it was off course at the largest amount by nearly 50 miles or so to even be near Gomel. this is a massive navigational error, and one that is really difficult to pull off to that kind of scale, unless if these guys only had flight experience on Microsoft Flight Simulator and really didn't know how to navigate the drones, which is highly likely at this point. I mean, we are talking about the Russian Federation here. So I would generally believe that it most likely was incompetence, because not only did drones land and explode around Gomel, but they also landed and possibly exploded onto the territory of Romania again. 2 major incidents, and this time they're not even revolving around the NATO country, they're just happening to any country that is to the north or south of Ukraine at this point in these drone attacks, which is clearly letting us know that this is not anything that seems to be deliberate. This seems to be absolute incompetence on the Russian drone pilot's end to actually be able to competently navigate and fly these drones to their targets. Still, pretty interesting to note, this is the first time that we've ever possibly heard that some of them have impacted, and we might get more information on that tomorrow, because usually video and picture evidence coming out of Belarus or Russia usually takes us about a full day since the incident happened for us to actually get the video and picture evidence. So right now we can confirm there was air defense action over Gomel. Tomorrow we'll be able to confirm or deny if there was any direct impacts onto the city of Gomel itself. But moving on from that,
Honestly, real quick, Enforcer, I'm seeing people in the live chat say, I blame the vodka. I mean, it's possible, of course. Like, we've seen some heinous incompetence over the course of this war, but from the Russian side, y'all seen it too from the footage we've shown. It could have been the vodka. Like, these commanders are not what you'd call top-notch people, especially when it comes to military operations inside of Russia. So it is possible that they simply forgot to call up Belarus to let them know, or it's possible they simply misprogrammed the drone and it went to the wrong place, and it just happened to go right into their allied country that they use as a puppet state. So it could be the vodka. It could be maybe a little too much to drink from Avon.
I would have to say, I think it might be a little bit of the booze, Bliet. Maybe so. Also, Mandy, by the way, before we move on, do we have any news at all, whether it's true that there's anything going on in Iran?
So I've scoured all of my sources right now, and I do not see anything about an uprising in Iran. Of course, if it just happened, if it is true, I would probably not have information that fast, but I'm not seeing even an inkling about that. So I would say probably not, but I'll keep a lookout.
We will continue to keep an eye on that. But at the moment, that doesn't sound like it was true. So anyone who was having hope that an Iranian revolution is happening tonight, it is not happening tonight from what we can tell. So moving on from that and out of that little side note, just to update you all on that, just to make sure that we got that correct and out there, we are going to be moving on into some fairly interesting news coming out of the Middle East. And this is actually a segment that I know many people have really wanted, and I finally have enough news to be able to report on it. One, we're going to be talking about what Israel is now claiming that they're going to be doing. And second, we're also going to be moving into Syria and talking about all of the Syrian interim government news that came out today. I got to be honest with y'all, I'm not really that happy with it. But we are going to be moving on into the state of Israel, as we have been able to hear that Israel is going to be planning major strikes on Iranian nuclear weapons research and development sites here within the near future. As Israel is likely to strike Iran in the coming months, warns U.S. intelligence. And we were also able to hear from additional sources from U.S. intelligence that they were also planning on targeting and destroying the nuclear weapon and research development sites inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. As far as this goes as a strategic issue and an issue of foreign policy, this is a fairly smart measure to make, considering that the Islamic Republic of Iran is not a signer of the nuclear non-proliferation treaties, meaning that it is not allowed by international law to possess any kind of nuclear weapons of any sort. So the Israelis, or anyone for that matter, taking action to destroy these sites and to ensure that the Islamic Republic of Iran is not able to continue development on nuclear weapons is an incredibly good thing. And so we're pretty happy to see that, and good to know that we're going to be taking decent steps to deal with the nuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran and largely stop that from happening in the first place. However, things seem to be fairly interesting around the rest of the region, and this is going to move us on into a general overview right now of what the region is looking like, just to give you all an idea of what's going on right now. For one, it appears that the ceasefire is soon to end in between the Iranian proxy forces of Hezbollah and Hamas and the State of Israel, as we were able to hear yesterday that the Israelis are now conducting a mobilization of reservists once more to possibly begin a venture into the Gaza Strip again. We are also hearing that Israeli forces are still occupying occupying some areas of southern Lebanon and are building military bases, as it appears that they're going to be creating semi-permanent basings within that area as they continue to deal with Hezbollah within that direction. Meanwhile, an idea has been floated by the United States government, it appears in Syria's form, to create a U.S. overseas territory of the Gaza Strip and forcefully relocate millions of people living in the Strip into the surrounding countries near to Israel, including Egypt, the Kingdom of Jordan, and the Syrian interim government. All three of these nations have openly refused to allow any Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to be allowed into their country, many of them citing additional reasons that there could be Hamas terrorists that are brought into their countries through this massive influx of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. We have also been able to hear that the Egyptians just yesterday closed diplomatic talks with the United States and have also moved their armed forces to the border to turn away with force, if necessary, any forceful relocations of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. This is also coming on top of the news that the nation of Lebanon appears to pretty much have been hijacked completely at this point by Hezbollah, as it appears that they are operating the government largely as a husk at this point and are still running government operations within the nation of Lebanon. We have also been able to hear that the Kingdom of Jordan has openly threatened to declare war on the state of Israel if any Palestinians are forcefully relocated into their territory. And we've also been able to hear, in additional news as well, that the Syrian interim government is having some comeuppances with the Russian Federation at this point about the continued evacuation of Russian armed forces from the Syrian interim government's territory. And so, now with this general overview of what's going on in the Middle East, I think many of y'all can tell that the situation isn't the most ideal. I want to, make sure to kind of, explain the situation here. Right now, the United States is in a bit of a precarious position to explain some of the situation. Egypt and Jordan are actually a part of the United States security assurances arrangement that exists within the Middle East. The United States security assurances arrangement largely exists with Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and a couple of other countries, including Egypt and the Kingdom of Jordan, to ensure that the Islamic Republic of Iran does not conduct any kind of hostile actions directed to those countries without the United States responding in kind. For the large part, it is an informal defensive pact that has been enforced previously in the past in major measures, for example, the Gulf War. However, it appears that some of these members, including the Kingdom of Jordan and the Republic of Egypt, appear to be having major issues right now with U.S. foreign policy measures within the area and possible actions that may be made to pretty much remove Hamas from the Gaza Strip and relocate them into the surrounding countries. But we have also been able to hear some fairly interesting news from a country that is outside of the U.S. security assurances arrangement within the area, which is the Syrian interim government, whose future is still largely uncertain at this point. And I've been watching with keen interest for any piece of news that's been coming out about this country and how their internal development is going, because it is something of important note. If this country starts to move back in the Iranian and Russian direction, the Russians will be able to maintain a hold in the Middle East indefinitely. If it moves into the Western direction, we have largely expelled any kind of Russian influence from the region indefinitely into the future, and the only issue that we have at this point would be with the Islamic Republic of Iran and their attempt to create a nuclear weapon. So the future of Syria is a fairly important one, because if Syria ends up becoming a Western-aligned country, that means that the U.S. security assurances arrangement within the area is watertight. There's really nothing that could even threaten those security arrangements unless if, for example, the Islamic Republic of Iran somehow got access to a nuclear weapon. So, with all of this in mind, kind of giving you all the lay of the land right now and the current diplomatic situation that's going on in the Middle East, let's get into the news that we were hearing out of the Syrian interim government today. First, we were able to hear that Jelani has spoken in greater detail. I'm not going to lie, seeing him in a suit is incredibly bizarre, but we were...
He looks like Zelensky's Middle Eastern cousin. I'm not going to lie. Like, when he's standing here and he has the beard and, like, I don't know what it is, the facial, like, structure, everything matches up to Zelensky. He's just got a different beard. That's it.
I would like to thank everyone for accepting a C from Syria.
Something like that. It's
Yeah,
like,
really.
something
If he has that same voice, I'm about to lose it.
Dude, that would be crazy. But nevertheless, Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, who is this fella here, which we've actually called Jelani in the past. I don't know why everyone called him Jelani, but apparently his name is actually al-Shara. He has revealed that the operation to seize Damascus, the offensive operation that was conducted by the HTS, took 5 years to prepare. So for the large part, they were preparing pretty much since since the creation of the HTS for this offensive operation that was kicked off last year successfully. He estimates that organizing presidential elections could take up to 5 more years, emphasizing the need to rebuild infrastructure and update electoral data. So it appears that right now, Jelani, as we've been calling him, or Ahmed al-Shara, who is this fellow right here, is saying that it's going to take 5 years for the interim government to create a stable kind of a government well into the future. As far as that goes, that's actually not that unrealistic. Just for those of y'all who do not know, it actually took about 5 years for the United States, after the Treaty of Paris of 1783, to actually create an effective form of government that we see to this day. A lot of people believe that the U.S. Constitution was made pretty much immediately. It actually was about 5 years after the United States became an officially recognized country around the world that the United States then had the Constitutional Convention and created the U.S. Constitution that we know of today. Before that, you could largely say that the United States was also in its interim government phase, as we actually were the Confederate States of America, and not of the Civil War variety, but we were actually a confederation, not a federal republic. That means that all of the power really was within the states, and there was an incredibly weak federal government that really had no power to enforce anything over anyone. It was more so ceremonial than anything before the Constitutional Convention. So at this point, it does sound like Jelani is largely saying that the governmental development will be on a normal process. It's not quick, so we do know that this is going to be a fairly slow and deliberate process, which is a somewhat decent sign, at least on this standalone point right here. But there are more concerning things that I've been hearing that have been coming out of the Syrian interim government today, especially from the Syrian foreign minister, who's currently in charge of being the foreign minister for the entirety of the Syrian interim government. And here's the statement that was made today by Assad. A lot of people are familiar with that name, but it's spelled differently, actually. It's got 2 A's instead of a single one. But al-Shaybani, we seek to rebuild relations with Russia and Iran and received positive messages in this regard. We respect Lebanon as a neighboring state and will stand by it whenever they need us. And I will visit Baghdad soon. Now, the statements from the foreign minister are not necessarily great. In fact, these appear to be going in the entirely opposite direction than what we would be hoping that the Syrian interim government's direction would be. We are hoping that the Syrian interim government starts to move towards a Western direction. It appears at the moment that the Syrian interim government may actually be returning right back to a pro-Iranian, pro-Russian direction, possibly because of their alignment with somewhat radical ideologies under the leading group in the interim government, which is the Tahrir al-Sham, which is the HTS. We are going to be watching that a little carefully, and I do have to say that these statements are fairly concerning, especially from the foreign minister. I would have to say that the United States, if we were wise, would pay considerable attention over these next few months about the actions and direction of the Syrian interim government. And I would actually highly encourage limited military intervention inside of Syria to possibly start to steer the Syrian interim government into the Western direction instead of allowing them to once again become a base of Iranian and Russian operations within this area of the Middle East. That would be incredibly concerning, as not only does that mean that Hezbollah will be rearmed and refitted for combat with Israel well into the indefinite future, but it also means that the Syrian nation can once again be used as a staging point for the Russian Federation to conduct their own operations in the Middle East, threatening U.S. operations within the entirety of the area and U.S. homogenous control of the Arabian Peninsula for the large part. We also were able to hear some additional news from the Syrian interim government as well in this form, and I'll be explaining just the overview that we got from the Institute for the Study of War today. Also, just to let you all know, it does appear that the Syrian Democratic Forces, while largely being a part of the interim government, is not officially melded into the interim government's control at this point. This area in purple is the area that the Syrian interim government largely still does control at this point, and from what we understand, they still are largely representing the wishes and interests of the multicultural group that makes up this area of northeastern Syria, and most importantly, the Kurds, which has still put them at considerable odds with the Turks, who are incredibly unfavorable to any kind of Kurdish populations because of the PKK inside of southeastern Turkey. But nevertheless, we have been able to hear that the Syrian interim president Ahmed al-Shara formed a preparatory committee on the 12th of February, which was today, that is mostly comprised of pro-Tahrir al-Tasham individuals who are loyal to Shara. The composition of this committee suggests that it will likely make decisions that align with Shara's views and objectives. So while the original news that it would take 5 years to create a successful permanent government for the Syrian Republic seemed to be good news, everything else that we're getting from the foreign minister and from the Institute for the Study of War is not really looking that good, to be entirely honest. It actually does appear at the moment that Shara may be attempting to create a different kind of an emirate, possibly a radical emirate that may once again align itself with more radical factions like the Islamic Republic of Iran, and may continue on the same kind of control and influence that was almost seen exactly under Bashar al-Assad. This would be fairly concerning for the United States and our interest in the region if this is the case, and it does appear that considerable attention needs to be paid to what's going on in Syria and how the government will be developing, because it seems to be of great concern at this point. We also were able to...
I wonder what tipped them over the edge with this, because it seemed like they were moving pro-Western, and that would make sense because, of course, they just got rid of al-Assad, who was Russian-backed, and they did all kinds of atrocities inside of Syria to the civilians. So there's really a weird disconnect here with why they're suddenly turning back to the Russians. I wonder what the Russians have offered them, or I wonder if Israel attacking and destroying all that military equipment inside of Syria is what made this new government inside of the country decide we do not want to go Western, we would rather go back to the Russians and take our chances there, because it just seems like a very illogical thing to do, to return back to Putin's influence, considering that he was literally funding Assad's torture regime basically inside of Syria.
I don't really know. That's a good question. And I would generally have to say that I would believe that it appears that the Syrian interim government may be moving towards the Iranian direction for many reasons, but most importantly, I would say that it may be their ideological beliefs. The Tahrir al-Tasham, as many people know, is pretty much the predecessor of the successor to an Al-Qaeda splinter cell that existed within the area of Idlib within northwestern Syria for some time, and this was one of the predecessors. So there may be a decent amount of radical ideology that is at play with the formation of this new government, but it does appear that this is a fairly interesting kind of a development, not in a necessarily good way, and if the United States was wise, we would pay great attention to this while we can mold Syria into what we would like it to be, and possibly take actions to ensure that that molding is done, if y'all get what I'm saying here. But we also were able to hear that the Uyghurs, and this was one of the most interesting things that we heard today, the Uyghurs, according to the Syrian Department of Higher Education, are going to be provided free education from primary school to university. Now, this is the interesting thing. Uyghurs are not even native to Syria. Uyghurs are a group of people that live within the area of the Xinjiang province of Western China. And as many people know, there's a fairly interesting thing going on in Western China with that specific ethnic group of people at this point. We cannot get into that because YouTube does not like that for some reason, so we just simply cannot cover that without getting shadow banned. So with that in mind, we're just going to put that out there. I'm sure many of y'all know what we're talking about, but this is a fairly interesting move that led me to say and believe that I believe that the new Syrian Arab Republic is moving in a much more radical ideological direction than anything, because one thing that some people may know is that the Uyghurs, which is how this is pronounced, I know a lot of people are like, what? That's actually how they're pronounced. But the Uyghurs are an Islamic group of people that live within Western China. That's specifically why they are having somewhat issues, considerable issues for that matter, inside of Western China. But it does appear that the Syrian interim government is going out of their way to provide some sort of major benefit to those people of Western China that are Islamic, and this is what's leading me to believe that they're more so traveling down an ideological path of decision-making than a logical path of decision-making, one that would look out for the best interests economically of the Syrian Arab Republic and all of its peoples. It seems to be more so looking out for the exact interests of the largely radical Islamic groups like the Tahrir al-Tasham and their interests for the future of Syria. All of these things are starting to show us that this would more so see that the government in Syria would develop into some kind of a of an Islamic Emirate or possibly a Islamic Republic like Iran. And the Islamic Republic of Iran would be the worst possible outcome for a government model inside of Syria. So if it appears that this is moving towards a very restrictive emirate or possibly even an Islamic Republic like Iran, I believe that we might want to consider taking some sort of concerted action, not in an overt military means, but in a more so a guiding hand kind of a way. As many people know, the United States is somewhat good at that, to make sure that the proper factions are in the Syrian interim government, to make sure that it moves more so into being, if anything, a benevolent Islamic emirate, much like the Kingdom of Jordan or Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, instead of moving directly back into the Iranian circle again, because that would be the worst outcome for U.S. and Western interests in the Middle East at this point. But a lot of people are talking about the Israeli action that we were speaking about beforehand, with what's going on in that area. And we have been able to hear that reports say that Israel is likely to strike Iran nuclear sites in coming months. And a lot of people are wondering, what will happen then? And it seems as though a lot of people are believing that Iran will silently go into hiding. Some people are saying that Iran will launch attacks on allies. Some others are saying that Israel will never attack some nuke sites. And others are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this? And what are you thinking about this as well?
All right, so the long-standing question, when is Israel going to go into Iran and take out those nuclear sites that that Israel's been saying they're going to take out for ages now? They didn't take them out before because the U.S. put a lot of pressure on them not to do that a couple of months back, actually, but now they're returning back to it, and reports say they're likely to do so in the coming months. So it looks like 42% of the audience said Iran will go silently into hiding if Israel does go in there and strike those nuclear sites, while 33% said Iran will launch attacks on their allies, on Israel's allies, that is, and 9% said Israel will never attack the nuke sites. And generally speaking, I would say this. I think that if Israel goes through the plan to strike those nuke sites inside of Iran, I think that Iran will lash out. I don't think they're going to go away silently on that one, because that would pretty much dash any ambition they had of becoming a nuclear power, and that's what Iran's been moving forward and moving towards for quite some time. So that would set them back tremendously and also take away all their leverage that they currently have in the Middle East. And that's the one thing that's made everybody really leery about messing with Iran, because we're really not sure if they have a nuke, and we're not sure how close they are to it. So that would cause them to lose all leverage. So I think they would probably actually launch attacks on Israel's allies and also Israel itself, somewhat at 33%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that they're probably going to try and go out swinging. Now, I do want to say this. If they believe that there's some way for the situation to be avoided, they're probably going to sit back and start going into hiding. But at this point, I think it's fairly clear with the information that the Iranian government's getting, much like the information we're getting, that there really is no way for them to go into hiding at this point. The Israelis and the United States are going to be fairly committed to destroying Iranian abilities to create nuclear weaponry. So with this in mind, the Iranians are going to want to go out swinging, because at least the government can save face with the public and make it look like they were fighting for what they supposedly claim they believe in. So with this in mind, I do believe that the Iranians are most likely going to be launching attacks against our allies in the region, possibly through asymmetrical means using terroristic forces like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, but they also will be conducting direct overt attacks against Israel itself, much like they've done in the past with their missile and drone forces in two prior incidents. I think that most likely is the likely route of action that will be seen within the area, as that would make the most sense based off of Iran's previous decision-making processes, where they had the decision to either ramp it up or try and back off, and usually, most times, I'd say there was about an 80% chance they would ramp it up each and every time to try and save face a little bit and then back off. So that's largely what I believe would be going on at this point. So with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least the best I can, at least the best we can, at least. But moving on from that, I hope that explains what's going on in the Middle East fairly well, because there's a lot going on. It's just that it's all preparatory at this point, especially in the Syrian interim government and in the state of Israel and in Iran and in Jordan and in Egypt and in Lebanon and in Saudi Arabia and in Yemen and really everywhere. I mean, really anywhere you look in the Middle East at this point, there's some sort of preparatory action going on for something that may begin in the future. It's a fairly interesting place at this moment, and there's a lot of moving parts within this area. Well, one thing that has a large amount of moving parts is something that was going on today in the diplomatic sphere that actually does still pertain to the Middle East in a way, specifically to Saudi Arabia. And this moves us on into something that I know many of y'all have heard about tonight, and we are going to be explaining it in the most politically neutral way that we can, but considering that it appears that it is a major development in Ukrainian affairs, we will explain what's going on, but I'm also going to explain the impact of some of the decision-making that's been made today, which is not necessarily the greatest kinds of statements that have been made so far, to put it in a very polite way. So we are going to be moving on over into the United States, into Washington, D.C., because there is a load of news to cover today. We were able to hear that the President of the United States did get into a call with President Volodymyr Zelensky today. And as Zelensky said in his social media post, he said, "I just spoke with the President of the United States. We had a long conversation about the possibilities of achieving peace, about our readiness to work together at the team level, about our technological capabilities, in particular drones and other modern production. I'm grateful to the President of the United States for his interest in what we can do together." Then the President of Ukraine also added that they had a conversation with Scott Bessent and the preparation of a new agreement. And after, he also stated that Ukraine wants peace more than anyone else. "We are defining our joint steps with the United States to stop Russian aggression and guarantee a reliable, lasting peace. As the President of the United States said, let's get it done," and we agreed on further contacts and meetings. We then heard a little before that, as a matter of fact, that the President of the United States had been on a phone call with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. And it does appear that there has been some fairly interesting developments that came out of that a little bit later on today, as we were able to hear that the President of the United States did state that the U.S. will continue to provide assistance to Ukraine, something we can confirm, as a matter of fact, through the Ramstein meetings, which we'll be discussing here in a moment, but they wanted to be under the guarantees of having access to Ukrainian rare earths, and that is the entire arrangement in its basic form, is that as long as the United States has unlimited access to Ukrainian rare earths, the United States will continue to provide military support Ukraine into the indefinite future. However, there's also been additional statements that were made that are a little interesting. And this one's largely paraphrasing what was stated today by the Secretary of Defense, not the President himself, but the President of the United States did make it clear through the Secretary of Defense today that Ukraine joining NATO is not practical under the United States assessment at this time. There was also two different statements that were made, one by the Secretary of Defense and one by the President. The Secretary of Defense said that Ukraine returning to its pre-2014 borders is no longer viable, according to the United States of America. The President of the United States said that even getting the Russians to back off the current front lines is not a viable option. So right now we have two different statements being made by the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. We're not really sure which one the U.S. government is going to be following along at this point, whether it's going to be the President's statement or the President saying that as a form of bravado, and we're actually going with what the Secretary of Defense said, which is that the United States is seeking to retain Ukraine's territory that they had prior to the 2014 actions of the creation of separatist groups in the Donbass and also the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. There also was some additional details as well that the President of the United States is not meeting with Zelensky in person anytime soon. However, he has already arranged a plan to meet with President Vladimir Putin in a neutral meeting area, which will most likely be within the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, in a little while. We assume that it most likely will be in a couple of weeks. This is a fairly interesting deal. We've also been able to hear that media asked the president today if the Ukrainians would be directly involved in the negotiations, and the president said that that was a very interesting question. He might circle back to that and think about that, possibly suggesting that Ukraine will not be involved in the U.S.-Russian talks about the Russian-Ukraine war, which the active belligerent parties are the Ukrainians as the defending party and the Russians as the aggressor party. A lot has come out about this, and I have to say that it is a very interesting kind of a deal. And when I mean a deal, I don't mean a peace deal. I mean more so as the events that have conspired today. And I would generally have to say that the United States, it appears to not really be following an incredibly good path of policy making in foreign affairs or diplomatic actions for the large part. The United States of America has to be there for our allies and our supporters, much like the Russian Federation has to be there for its allies and supporters, like the Assad regime, which it appears that Putin will still not be handing over Assad back to the Syrian interim government, because that would be showing a bad sign to the remainder of Russia's allies, which are few and far in between. The United States of America has to ensure that our interests abroad are protected. That is largely our priority. The United States exists on a pedestal. The United States doesn't exist as a great nation simply because we are the best and the greatest. We exist on a pedestal because we have a massive amount of allies and trading partners that we have incredibly good relations with around the world. And those incredible relations have been created over the course of nearly 70 years since the end of World War II, because the United States affirmed commitment to being there to protect and back up any of our allies wherever they may be around the world, and protecting them against any kind of adversaries wherever they may be, like the Soviet Union or the People's Republic of China or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and in even recent times in the Middle East, the Islamic Republic of Iran and the government of Saddam Hussein. These things have been evident over U.S. policymaking for those 70 years. The 70 years where the United States has seen the greatest economic prosperity and growth ever seen in the world. This is something that I would have to say is a poor decision by the United States to try and arrange a peace treaty off of the current statements that have been made, because I've also got to add in the additional statements that I was not able to include because most of it was televised and we would most likely get copyright striked if we showed it. So I will also be telling y'all some of the additional peace arrangements that were stated by the President of the United States today. There wasn't really a great amount of detail given by the Secretary of Defense, rather than some very minimal things at the Ramstein meeting today, but I will talk about what the president said directly. The president of the United States stated that this is as follows for the peace treaty. Ukraine will not join NATO under any circumstances. There can be peacekeepers inside of Ukraine, but they will not be provided any NATO protections under Article 5, and they will not be a part of a NATO mission. Meaning that these peacekeepers really do not have the protections of NATO at large, meaning that the countries who take on the purpose of being a peacekeeper in Ukraine are taking on that at their own risk, and largely are not able to count on the NATO alliance for larger protections, or the United States for that matter, from protections against the Russian Federation's possible aggression in the future. We have also been able to hear that these nation of Ukraine practically has to hold elections immediately on Putin's terms, not Zelensky's terms, to be able to elect a new Ukrainian government. Tampering could be highly prevalent in that kind of an election. We have also been able to hear that the state of Ukraine, while the Russian Federation will not have any sort of arrangements put on their military restructuring and rebuilding efforts. They can rebuild their military as they see fit and as they please over any period of time that they would like, to not even prevent any form of escalation. We have also been hearing that the state of Ukraine largely will still have to give over precious metals for U.S. military support into the future on the current arrangement. With these terms outlined, the West in the United States is not really achieving any of the goals that we hold necessary inside of Ukraine. Out of the two kinds of aspects that we're really looking for inside of Ukraine, on the strategic level, there are two. For Ukraine to be in NATO, or for the Russians to be kicked out of Sevastopol, or both. Those are really the arrangement that the West would be looking for as the most ideal and advantageous. Not only that, we don't even know at this point, just to add this in, because I'm trying to remember all of the points here on the top of my head, we don't even know if Ukraine is going to be involved in the peace agreement. Ukraine could just be entirely left out, and the peace agreement could be made by the Russians and the United States, and then the United States just strong arms Ukraine into accepting the deal. So moving on from that, this is not a necessarily good kind of a decision-making process by the United States, and I largely have to say that the President of the United States is misguided in his actions and attempting to create this kind of a peace deal, because this is, by no other means, a sellout. We are not looking for any form of U.S. terms or arrangements to be achieved inside of Ukraine. This appears to be giving the Russians exactly what they want. And this turns into appeasement at that point. And I would actually have to say that this is a fairly concerning form of appeasement, because it has all the very kinds of appeasement layers that would have existed in the Munich Agreement of 1938 in between Britain, France, and Adolf Hitler. And just to explain that agreement, the similar things that happened then, the Germans were wanting to claim the Sudetenland. They claimed that the German people lived in Sudetenland, and that they required for the German people to be under their protections because the Czechoslovakians had been treating the Germans in the Sudetenland poorly. The Germans did threaten that they would go to outright blows and war to take over that area of the Sudetenland, and later on largely annex Czechoslovakia as a whole and create a puppet state out of Slovakia if their demands were not met. the United Kingdom and France both came together and went to Munich to make a peace arrangement with the Germans. The peace arrangement largely stated that the Germans get everything that they want, and Britain and France will stand by, allow them to annex the Sudetenland, will not be providing any military defense or assistance to Czechoslovakia, and the Germans would take the Sudetenland. The Germans then took the Sudetenland, and Hitler did pledge that at that point the Sudetenland was the last territorial ambition of Germany, and that Germany had no other further territorial ambitions beyond the Sudetenland inside the Czechoslovakian region. Not that long after, he would end up annexing the entirety of the Czech Republic, the modern-day Czech Republic, and create a puppet state out of Slovakia. About a year after that, he would end up invading Poland. At this situation right now, I would say that the peace arrangement that's being given and the kind of future that we would be seeing would be very similar to Neville Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time, and the build-up to a war that would be unavoidable in the future because of U.S. negotiating weakness in the present day. The Russian Federation has been militarily grinded down inside of Ukraine and does not have the ability to conduct further territorial ambitions outside of Ukraine or outside of its own borders for several years. The Russian Federation at this point is about to be given a deal of appeasement. We are not going to achieve really any of our goals inside of Ukraine. Ukraine is not going to become a part of NATO. Ukraine is also not going to be given back Sevastopol, which would ensure that the Black Sea Fleet is not able to leverage any kind of a diplomatic incident in the Middle East. So the United States is failing on both of those aspects, achieving our strategic interests. Not only that, because Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO, its ascension to the European Union, because of the economic instabilities that a future war, which will be inevitable, will bring, will pretty much ensure that Ukraine is blocked from entering the European Union, meaning that they will not be able to enter any kind of Western European or really Western sphere economic alliances, and the Ukrainian economy will most likely begin to stall. We will then see that the Russian Federation will take however much time is necessary to rebuild its military, and because Ukraine has no NATO security assurances whatsoever or NATO ascension, the Russian Federation will be able to begin the war at whim and continue it again. And who's to say at that point that the Russian Federation doesn't have further territorial ambitions, such as the Baltics and parts of Poland, that has already been made clear by Putin verbally on video over several years since the war has begun, that he seeks to see through. It is very clear that not only is Ukraine at stake, but the entirety of Eastern Europe and the Western alliance in this area is at stake of Russian aggression. I would have to say that, in my honest opinion, remaining entirely out of politics and speaking on the foreign affairs posturing alone, this is an incredibly poor plan and an incredibly poor idea that I believe will not age incredibly well. And many people will look back at this attempt at a peace agreement and say that it was incredibly similar to Neville Chamberlain's Munich conference and the Peace in Our Time that we saw. That would be my 2 cents on it. And of course, people can be open to agree or disagree, but whenever I see an action being taken by the United States, like the U.S. being lackluster on action against Iran, and now at this point, what appears to be largely appeasing the Russian Federation at this point in the conflict, I will have to be honest with you all, I can't really sit by and just act like it is a neutral thing. This is going completely in the wind against the United States' interests within the region, and really the West's interest at large in ensuring our integrity, and not only that, ensuring our strategic posturing against our adversaries. So I hope that does address that somewhat well, in my opinion, but a lot of people are talking a great deal at this point about the U.S. attempt to force Ukraine to accept capitulation for the large point for peace. And a lot of people are wondering what should happen next. It does appear that many people are saying that Europe should replace U.S. support. That appears to be the large majority. Some people are saying that the U.S. will not force Ukraine to do that. Some others are saying that Ukraine should take whatever they get. And others are saying that they are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So in this poll right here, once again, to repeat the question, it says, if the U.S. attempts to force Ukraine to accept capitulation for peace, then what should happen next? 63% of the audience said Europe should replace U.S. support, while 21% said the U.S. will not force Ukraine to do that, and 8% said Ukraine should take whatever they can get. And real quick, let me give a disclaimer. Anything that I'm about to say, I'm not being political. I personally don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not a political person. Even though I studied political science, I'm not involved in politics. So I'm about to say things from a neutral perspective. I'm trying to track every single day what's coming out of the United States government and what their current foreign policy positions are on Ukraine and other places around the world. I'm very challenged to keep up with it. It's hard to tell exactly what the position is right now, and there's a lot of confusing circular talk going on about how this is going to be addressed in Ukraine. So one day it's we're going to help Ukraine all the way and we're not going to let them be taken over, and then the next day it's they're going to make peace under any circumstance and it's all over. So I'm really not sure what to make of it at this point, but the statements today were honestly kind of disgusting because it sounded like the enforcer said, that the current position today on, February the 12th is that Ukraine needs to capitulate to Russia and basically give in to all their demands. That is not something that would be wise whatsoever, for several different reasons. First of all, it's sending a message to our allies that we don't have their back. Number two, we've invested a ton of money inside of Ukraine, and to simply let Ukraine capitulate and let Putin, who's a dictator, take over a massive part of Ukraine would be a massive insult to the U.S. taxpayer, which has basically funded the country fighting the war right now. And of course, once again, like I've been saying for months, if we do have this momentary peace, if you can call it a peace, it's more like a surrender. If we have this momentary surrender, Putin will be back in a year or two after he rebuilds his military to invade Ukraine once again and take the rest of it. And this time, he might be able to pull it off because he has more strength and power in his military and he learned from the mistakes the first time. So this is not good. We should not be forcing Ukraine to do anything. And the truth is, we can't force Ukraine to do a thing. If Ukraine does not want to agree to a peace deal, the U.S. has no authority to force Ukraine to do a thing. But the one thing the U.S. does have the authority to do is to pull support from Ukraine, which could be detrimental. And that's where Europe needs to put their money where their mouth is. If they're truly all for Ukraine, they need to step up and tell the U.S., we are not going to tolerate you backing out of supporting our allies. We're going to have to punish the United States for doing that. And in the meantime, we're going to have to support Ukraine 100% to make sure that they're not taken over by a dictator. And for that, I believe, honestly, even though I'm an American citizen, I love this country 100%, the U.S. would be in due for some punishment for simply abandoning an ally like that. I would say that would probably be justified and have to make us think twice about doing that again. Because once again, Europe is our allies. They're not our enemies, and Putin is the enemy. So we need to be very careful about who we're shunning and who we're being friends with, because right now we seem to be a little bit confused on that. So I'm generally with the 64%. Europe should replace the support. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that some people are saying some things in the chat. I've been seeing it while you've been talking, Matthew. Someone said, and I'll explain this because this is something that actually is easily explained. Why is Russia an adversary, to an enemy of the United States? Why aren't they a friend? We've never had a reason to dislike them. We have many reasons to dislike the Russian Federation, and I'll start it from the very beginning, way back at the Russian Revolution of 1917. During the Russian Revolution of 1917, we were allies with the Russian Federation. Actually, what used to be the Russian Federation, before the Soviet Union even, the Russian Empire. We supported Tsar Nicholas II and his imperial government inside the Russian Empire. When the Bolsheviks began to take over the country and executed the Tsar and his family in horrific fashion, the United States actually intervened with approximately 50,000 U.S. troops inside of the Russian Empire, and we were involved in that intervention for approximately a year. Eventually, the Reds would take over, and the Communists would end up becoming the leader of the Soviet Union in what became the Russian Empire. Well, what came of the Russian Empire. The Soviet Union made it incredibly clear that they were practically enemies with every single country that did not have a communist or dictatorial government that was aligned with their ideological interests, meaning that the Soviet Union pretty much declared that the United States was an enemy. Many people do not know this, but anti-communist actions in the United States existed well before the beginning of the Cold War and the end of World War II. During the late 1920s, one of the first objectives of the brand new Federal Bureau of Investigation was to investigate communist subversionist plots inside the United States being orchestrated by the Soviet Union and to largely upturn them for the large part. That was one of the first objectives of the FBI. During the Second World War, there was an uneasy alliance as the Soviet Union and the Allies had a specific objective of defeating Adolf Hitler and also Imperial Japan, and so we ended up having a small alliance with them then. But that was already short-lived because by the end of the war, the West, specifically the United States and the United Kingdom, both had a proposition that we should allow all of these countries within Europe that had been under the Nazi ilk to allow for them to have democratic elections to decide what kind of government they really want. Or do they want a democratic, self-determining government with a capitalistic monetary system, or do they want to have a form of a communist government? The Soviet Union openly denied that request and stated that they were going to be controlling those areas under Soviet control however they wished. That's why East and West Germany were a thing until 1989. That's why the Cold War began, is because the Soviet Union at that point already made it clear that their friendly ambitions with the United States, practically the Russian Federation, did not exist. That went on all the way until 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, and not long after, the United States went out of its way under the president at that time to extend an olive branch to the brand new Russian Federation and the brand new president, Boris Yeltsin, to try and see if we could end up coming up with a decent arrangement. There was a coup that was attempted against Yeltsin. Yeltsin ended up bombing the coup members inside of the Russian White Building, which is their version of the Congress. And then not long after that, the Chechen semi-autonomous republic became the Chechen Republic, declaring independence from the Russian Federation, and Yeltsin invaded the Chechen Republic and was defeated. This started to show the West already at that point that the Russian Federation was not that far off from its Soviet roots, and that they didn't really share the same kind of ideological alignment that the West did. It was incompatible at that point. Yeltsin would remain the president for some time. Putin would become the president in the year 2000. He would begin the Second Chechen War from 2000 to 2009, where he would once again pretty much invade the Chechen Republic, which illegally separated from the Russian Federation, and force it to be a part of the Russian Federation once more. Not long after that, the Georgian country, the Republic of Georgia, attempted to join the European Union and also tried to see if they could join NATO. The Russian Federation immediately invaded Georgia in late 2008, and over the next 2 months hammered the Georgians in a short war and ended up creating the illegitimate governments of West Abkhazia and South Ossetia. This already started to show that the Russian Federation, while pretending to be a friend of the West, was clearly anti-Western, as they were now taking direct military actions against countries that were seeking to join NATO and the European Union, largely because they had seen what had happened to the Chechen Republic, and they were starting to become incredibly fearful that the Russian Federation could turn that military action towards them. No one in Eastern Europe was forced to join NATO. Every single one of those countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia as a whole, including the Czech Republic and Slovakia, as well as Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria and many others, all joined NATO by their own request. The United States didn't expand NATO in this direction. Everyone in Eastern Europe ran from the Russians and joined NATO. They applied to NATO on their own request. They were accepted by every ally member, as is the NATO charter lays out. Every single member has to vote yes for the ascension of a new member. The Russians scared everyone in Eastern Europe away from them. We didn't force ourselves onto the Russians. The Russians ran every single one of their friends away for the large part. That's on them. That's not on us. We have seen that there's been untold economic prosperity and success within this region since then, and not only that, the Russian Federation has been able to bully and strong-arm these countries since then either. So then finally, we fast forward from when they invaded Georgia in 2009, and the Russians made it very clear that they were still anti-Western and still had ambitions to largely fight against any kind of friendship with the West. Then the nation of Ukraine, which had largely been a puppet of the Russian Federation's up until this point, around 2014, had a mass amount of civil unrest because the current president, Yanukovych, was attempting to extradite Ukrainian citizens that had committed crimes inside of Ukraine into Russia to be held accountable for their crimes, completely violating the sovereignty of Ukrainian citizenry and largely making Ukraine a part of Russia in itself. The riots then broke out, Yanukovych fled, and just a little while after that, Vladimir Putin would authorize military force to annex the Crimean Peninsula and also create quote-unquote separatist uprisings within the Donbass, once again clearly showing that whenever a country got scared of the Russians and attempted to run away from them, they were more than happy to threaten the sword to any of those countries, especially Ukraine, which is the most recent example. That only further solidified anti-Russian sentiments inside of Ukraine, seeing how quickly the Russians were to be cutthroat and pretty much screw them over once the Ukrainians made it clear that the Russians were being a little too heavy-handed with them. And so then Ukraine wanted to ensure that they would continue to fight the separatists inside the Donbass and also try and align themselves farther and farther with the West. Since then, the Russian Federation has made it incredibly clear they are not friends with the West. They view the West as open enemies, and they're going to do each and every single action that they can to ensure that not only the entirety of Europe is brought to its knees, but the United States is brought to its knees as well. These people are our enemies because they made themselves our enemies. They are not enemies because we wanted them to be. They continue to make themselves the enemies of the United States and the Western world as a whole. So conducting any actions in their support and acting like we should be fair with them and kumbaya and let's just get along is only going to shoot us in the foot later. It's the exact same kind of...
Also, we can't ignore the fact that once the USSR fell, a process basically began where the new Russia began duping the West and duping the United States into believing that they were somehow reformed and somehow had changed in some way or another. They've been basically going under the radar for the past, I would say, maybe since the 2000s till about the time that Crimea was annexed. They were trying to basically have neutral relations with the West and the United States, and many U.S. presidents met with Putin. Once again, it looked like things were going generally okay, but it turned out that was not the case. They were basically vying their time to get ready to once again try to go on imperialistic ambitions by reinvading Ukraine and doing things to neighboring states, because Putin's overall goal, like we've been preaching for years now, is to try to basically reinvigorate the Russian Empire of a sort and go and take the Baltic states back. And that is his ultimate goal. So he's not stopping with Ukraine. I will never back off of that. He's not going to stop with Ukraine. And if somehow there was a surrender or a peace or capitulation, whatever you want to call it, inside of Ukraine, that is going to be only temporary. It's going to restart in a year or 2 years. You can mark my words on that. It will restart. And all we're doing is letting Putin have all the time he needs, like he's had over, the last decade, to once again learn from his mistakes, rebuild the military, and try it again. And he might actually get away with it the next time. And then, once he takes Ukraine, he'll be moving on from there after maybe a couple more years. Whoever comes after him will be carrying on the sword as well. So it's just, we can't just let them do that. Like, for one thing, it's not fair to Ukraine. We're abandoning allies. And once again, we've invested so much to let that country simply fall like that. And Ukraine's sacrificed a lot of people in the military to simply walk away from it. And it's honestly disrespectful to tell Ukraine, we're going to force you to capitulate or else. And we're not even going to let you be in the negotiations. You're going to have to step out of the negotiations. We're going to talk to your enemy directly. You sit back and be quiet after you've lost all your guys trying to fight for your land. It's just crazy to think that's actually what's being considered right now. And I know, once again, it is just talk right now. I see people saying that in the live chat. That is true. But hopefully it stays just talk. Because if it turns into reality and it starts, going down this path permanently, that would not be a good look. And hopefully, like I said before, hopefully Europe steps up here, because it's time for Europe to actually step up and say something and not just sit back idly while Ukraine gets taken. Because if they truly believe what they say, they should step up and say something. And maybe that'll put the U.S. back into line to keep supporting Ukraine. But until someone speaks up, it's going to keep going this way, unless it's maybe just a bluff or talk or something like that.
Also, one more thing I'd like to say is that some are saying some things that have to deal with, say, the United States as a whole, or the president conducting treason. And I want to make this fairly clear. This isn't treason by any means what the president would be doing if he went down this course of action that I've said I'm completely against. This is actually under the president's enumerated powers in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. This is well within the president's means to make treaties, whether they are great or absolutely horrendous, like I believe that this current proposition is. However, while one can say that it is not treasonous, one can also say that it is a horrendous plan and a horrendous idea. And I would have to be in that camp of saying that if this is the peace proposition that we have right now, which the Russians would largely snatch up in an instant because there's hardly anything at all that they could disagree with, it's largely meeting them exactly right at where they started at the negotiating table, this would be a horrendous thing. This is like, I would say that I would be much more happy with the negotiating process if the United States tried to achieve one thing, finagle one thing. I mean, hell, if they just took back a part of Kherson, then I would go, okay, well, at least it looks like they're trying to get something. But right now we're trying to get nothing out of this. I mean, there's quite literally nothing to gain out of this. It's a horrendous kind of a peace deal. It is quite truly appeasement. And someone tried to say it's not capitulation. I would have to agree with Matthew and how he wrote that poll. It is capitulation. We are meeting the Russians exactly at the terms they laid out. We are not even trying to achieve any of our own goals or aspirations for Ukraine or for the Western world inside of the war. We are giving the Russians exactly what they want. And as far as I'm concerned, that is entirely appeasement. And that is incredibly poor policy making. That is an incredibly poor deal brokerage of any kind that I've seen so far. Hopefully that will just be words and talk alone, and we won't see that this will actually be acted out on. Hopefully we'll see that the peace talks fall apart and we just continue to have to press on the war. But
Enforcer, here's my question. And this is a question I have for the chat, because generally I do not know. I'm not trying to be sarcastic or try to be cute here with this. But I believe that what I heard, if I can keep everything straight, the U.S. is signing an agreement to take Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for giving military aid to Ukraine. So why all of a sudden this morning or this evening or whenever it was said is now Ukraine being told they need to accept capitulation, and they don't even get to have a say in the negotiations, but yet they just signed over their rare earth minerals to the United States. I don't know if I'm missing something, or maybe there's a disconnect there. I don't know really what that's about, but that doesn't seem to line up, because surely we wouldn't be telling Ukraine to capitulate, give in and give up their land, and then take their rare earth minerals, because, where's the benefit to Ukraine?
I don't really know. It's like that is also a raw deal right there as well. Ukraine doesn't even get a spot at the negotiating table, but they have to give up $560 billion worth of possible rare earths inside of Ukraine for really nothing in return. They really honestly just get disrespected at the end because they don't even get a say in how their own defensive war ends. Like that's a wild thing to me. And also someone said, you guys are way too emotional. I don't even know how. I'm speaking about this in the most clinical way I can. But beyond that, it's one hell of a thing. Like, it's not, I would say, not really in a good way today.
Okay, so I'm seeing someone in the live chat say that the mineral deal is for past assistance. But the way I heard it phrased, though, was that was for future assistance. But if that's for past assistance, that's a little bit interesting, because that was not the arrangement before. The arrangement was we were supporting Ukraine because it was in our interest. That was the arrangement. There was no agreement in place to take their minerals in exchange for that assistance. So to retroactively go back and say, we need payment for stuff that you never agreed to pay for, that wouldn't be fair, in my opinion. Of course, sometimes things aren't fair in life, but, that doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. Me personally, I'm still standing by the fact I think I heard that it was an agreement in place to get the minerals in exchange for future military aid, which is the way I understood it. But, the statements just aren't lining up. So maybe we'll wake up tomorrow and the statement will be, we're behind Ukraine all the way, let them fight Russia, they're going to keep their land. Maybe that'll be the case. If it is, I'm probably going to pull my hair out. But if it's not, then I'll be a little bit concerned.
But one thing we were able to hear, just to make sure to clarify this, that in the meantime, support does appear that it will continue to flow. We were able to hear directly from the Ukrainians, because they're the only people I'm going to accept words on at this point about whether they're continuing to get support or not. But we did get to hear the Defense Minister Umerov of Ukraine did state today that Ukraine received very powerful aid packages following the Ramstein meeting in Brussels, as well as assurances from partners of support not only in 2025, but also in the following years. So we were able to hear that it does appear that for now, the United States is still committed to providing military support and economic assistance to Ukraine, but the question is for how long, because we don't even know what's going to be going on as far as the end of the war, and based off of the current terms, a peace deal could be made at this point quite easily, because the Russians aren't even having to meet us in the middle. We're meeting them right where they started in this negotiation at this point. I'm going to have to be honest with you all. I'm just going to throw this in here. I would have to say that most of the deal making by the current president has been fairly poor in matters of foreign policy, because I'd also like to remind everyone that the current president is the one who made the arrangement for the Israelis to hand over hundreds of Hamas fighters back to Hamas, and also to return fuel and food aid to the Gaza Strip in return for 30 hostages, and out of those 30 or so hostages that were supposed to be returned, only 20 of them were returned, and the Hamas forces largely broke their deal. I would have to say that this seems to be a continuation of that sort of policy making or really deal making. And it doesn't seem to be that much within American interest at this point, especially if we're going off of the words said today. It seems to be nothing more than a raw deal for the Ukrainians, and not really a great one at that. But nevertheless, it does appear that many people are talking about this right now. It's a point of major discussion, has been over the course of the entirety of today, and it does appear that a lot of people have been talking about this a good deal. And also, let's see here. Some people are saying, let's play it out. We are going to play it out, but going off the wordage that we've heard today, and I once again want to remind y'all that we have always been optimistic so far about the prior president and the current president and, their future handling of the conflict. But at this point, with the wordage said today, it's really backtracking on everything that this current president's been saying for a couple of weeks now. And that is why we're bringing it up tonight and saying that this isn't really the greatest of deals. We, of course, are not trying to go out of our way to make an issue about this. We're more so making an issue about it because it doesn't look good. Some people might say, oh, well, this sounds political. No, I actually did. Well, I will make this a little bit clear. When I say no politics, I'm not saying, what I'm saying is that I'm not going to be glazing Democrats or Republicans just for existing. I want to make that a little bit clear. But one thing I will do is that I will sometimes agree and disagree with things that I see that may or may not be within American interests abroad. Many of y'all will know that I've already made it somewhat clear, in my opinion, that with the Chinese compromisation of the Panamanian economic systems, and most likely the government as well, that I believe that the United States would be justified in retaking the Panama Canal Zone. That would be something that I could largely agree with the current administration on. However, I cannot agree with the current administration on the raw deal that appears that's about to be handed to Ukraine. That is just absolutely ludicrous. So y'all can kind of see here, just to make it a little bit more clear, I'm more of a free thinker and not really one to just start glazing political parties, because that starts to get into the political side of things. I'm not really a political kind of a schmuck. I like to more so look at things from a detached perspective and see if there is any sense to something or if there is no sense to anything involved at all. But still, a lot of people have been talking about the current peace arrangement at this point. And it does appear that many people are speaking about Russia saying it will never discuss a land-for-land exchange with Ukraine and instead will simply annihilate the Ukrainians and wipe them off the face of Kursk once and for all. And it does appear that a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts on this, and loads of people are saying that any negotiation with Russia practically means surrender at this point. Others are saying that Russia is just tough-talking to Ukraine, and some are saying that they're unsure and undecided, and very few are saying that the Russians seem that they're reasonable. But Matthew, what are people saying about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so 45% said any negotiation with Russia at this point equals surrender, basically, while 41% said Russia is simply tough-talking on Ukraine, and 5% said it seems like Russia is sensible. And I would say Russia is not sensible. They've not been sensible for actually at least over probably 6 or 7 years. And they've gotten really not sensible here recently, when they invaded Ukraine, that is. But I would say this, the fact that Peskov, who's the spokesperson for the Russian government, came out today and said they will never discuss a land-for-land exchange, meaning, once again, one of our main pieces of speculation for why Ukraine went into Kursk, which is the mainland region of Russia, to invade that land, was that we believe Zelensky was trying to basically build up a land bank so that way he could do a land-for-land exchange for parts of Ukraine in exchange for the Russian Kursk Oblast. But it sounds like Russia is ruling that out right now, and who knows where they got the idea they could rule that out, because once again, Ukraine is still fighting inside of Kursk, and it looks like they're making headway, and the Russians are not able to push them out. So the Russians are acting like they have leverage when they really don't, and who would know why they have that idea that they have leverage? Who would know? Sarcastic there a little bit, but I would say, generally speaking, they're probably just tough talking because, once again, they don't have any real leverage there. And unless Ukraine's forced to capitulate, which they really shouldn't be and probably won't be forced to capitulate completely, then I would say they're probably just tough talking. They'll probably have to talk about giving up some land. But, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the Russians are most likely tough talking. And also, really quickly, I do want to clear this up before I move on. Some people think I'm opening up the door for politics here. I'm not. I'm not here to glaze a former president or a current one, or to put them down and then say that the other one's terrible and this one's perfect. I'm not here to do that. Where I'm simply talking about in the vacuum of this supposed peace deal that was presented today, whether that's a good one or not. So I'm not making any comments about the president, whether I like him or hate him, and I'm also not making any comments about whether I like or hate certain political affiliations and groups. That's not at all what the objective of this is. The objective of it is to talk about the supposed peace deal and the current proposition that's being given right now and whether that's a good one or not. And my personal opinion is that it's not a good deal. So please do not use that as an opportunity to start bashing people who were in office or are in office, because that is not what the purpose of the discussion is, and the channel does not get into domestic politics. I'm not going to become another person out there, or literally every other YouTuber out there, that has to shove a political party affiliation down your throat, because that's not what this channel is about. But I will call a deal a raw deal when I see one, and I'll see a good deal and call it a good deal. So I hope that it gives y'all an idea of what I'm trying to go for here, because I see a lot of people agreeing, but this is the news, and that's my analysis on what we're hearing right now. So that is what it is, not making a political side. But beyond that, I would say that the Russians are most likely tough talking. Now, saying that there can be no negotiations with the Russian Federation, I would have to say is a little out there, because there is no such thing as a total victory in this kind of a conflict. Like, the Ukrainians are never going to march to Moscow and win the war that way. They get nuked before that happened. So we do have to understand that there has to be some sort of negotiations with the Russians. So I would assume that this is rough talk at this point, because everyone knows on every end that there will have to be a negotiation. Zelensky knows that, and he's said it before. Both presidents, the current one and the former one of the United States, both said it as well, and Putin has also said that on top of that, although he always adds the caveat that Zelensky is an illegitimate president, which is untrue. But nevertheless, I would have to say that I believe that negotiations have to happen. So the Russians, I suppose, are tough talking, because hopefully there will be a land-for-land exchange. I would like to see that Ukraine, at a minimum, gets back everything that they had before 2014. So everything except for Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk. That would be a pretty decent outcome, because we generally do assume, including Zelensky, before this whole thing happened today, he's been saying for months in the past that Ukraine will not be able to regain all of its territory, in any kind of a scenario, but they will be able to regain a good amount of it. So I believe that that's what we're largely looking at this point. So hopefully the statement from the Secretary of Defense is largely correct, and that Ukraine will be able to regain a decent amount of its land, or all of its land, that the Russians had not illegally seized in 2014. So with that, I hope that does...
Also, one last thing I want to say as well. I see people in the chat saying, you're overreacting. I will say this. I'm not saying that this is like a certainty at this point. Nothing's certain. I said that at the very beginning. Right now, we're hearing circular talk going wild. We're not really sure from one day to the next. Is Ukraine being abandoned? Is Ukraine being supported 100%? It's just flip-flopping quite a bit, so it's hard to keep up with it. It could be that this is simply talk. Maybe there's some sort of master strategy going on in the background. Maybe. We don't really know, because we're not in those closed-door meetings. Or it could be exactly what it looks like. We just don't know just yet. But certainly making statements like that were made today does not inspire confidence in people that want to support our allies. That does not inspire confidence whatsoever. In fact, it makes me very concerned, because I'm thinking in my head, it sounds like we're about to not only abandon Ukraine, but we're also about to piss off Europe, and Europe might end up retaliating against us for basically leaving them high and dry after basically abandoning Europe as well. So maybe it's not the case. We'll just have to wait and see on this one, and see how it ultimately turns out. But hopefully it's just talk.
Hopefully it is just talk. But with that, I hope we were able to explore that fairly well. And while we've gotten late on into the segment, because that was a pretty in-depth discussion about a major event that happened today, I do want to point out, just before we get into talking to all of y'all for a brief moment, just to take a little bit of a breather, Lex Fridman has still not gotten that interview with Putin. We kind of realized that tonight, that Zelensky was more than happy to talk to him, and it appears that Putin just completely ignored him and blew him off. So that's a little interesting, kind of showing y'all who is more interested in getting their side of the story out, and who doesn't really give a damn. But nevertheless, I hope that reminds y'all all of that, so y'all can all ask Lex one day what's going on and where's the Putin interview, because I'm personally interested in seeing it. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to get into some questions, because we do have a lot of questions from all of y'all, some of them incredibly spicy. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping into our first super chat question of the night. This one is going to go to none other than Purple Gerbil, who's a channel legend. And thank you very much, Mr. Gerbil, for
Hey!
that $50 support. Very generous of you. And thank you very much for helping to keep the channel running. And Purple Gerbil said, good evening from Canada, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt. And please take a live chat question and LSA forever.
And thank you so much for the massive support, Marie LSA, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I gotta thank you for being an old guard and a channel legend, and a big hello to Canada, a massive ally and one of the largest trading partners in the world with the United States. And I gotta say that we really respect y'all up there in the great frozen lands of Canada, most of it completely uninhabited. But I still thank you so much for being here with us tonight and supporting this channel and being a part of the Lee Spring Army, an international pro-Western, pro-American kind of an organization that looks out for American and Western interest as a whole. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we will make sure to get a live chat question. And I also do have to say a massive thanks to everyone who's been supporting the channel tonight. We've gotten a massive amount of support. All of y'all help this channel to keep on running and make this thing possible. We are one of the few people I would say is actually level-headed and non-political out there on the internet that covers this kind of news. And it is y'all's support alone that helps us to make this possible, doing this as a business and doing this as our full-time jobs. Folks like you, Purple Gerbil, and everyone else who's been supporting the channel in kind words and in super chats are a massive reason why we've been able to stay on air for 1,085 days, and why we'll be able to stay on air for however much longer we can. We got to thank you all so much for that. It means a lot, and I really do love to see that a lot of people really do enjoy our consistency, to where we don't really have any kind of a political bias to where someone just exists and it has a political affiliation, so everything they do is great or everything they do is terrible. We more so analyze everything on the foreign policy sphere and then say whether it's a good idea or not as a standalone concept. It's really something to know that we are really the only people who do that right now on the entirety of the internet, because it is a rare spot to be in, and I'll be honest with y'all, we get beat down more than we get praised, because one thing that the modern world does not like is free thinkers that think whether something is good or not, depending on the person who's in charge. And we're one of the few people, I would say one of the only people out here right now that actually does that. And we get beat over the head for it endlessly. Crazily enough, I've been waiting for this viewer to show up all night. I'm just going to let y'all know there was a warrant out for his ban that emailed me last night and called me a radical communist and threatened to publish a recording of a live show that hundreds of thousands of people were watching because I said something they did not like. So that was something that has happened a million times from people in different political camps. Not really a big fan of that kind of a deal. I'm more of a big fan of sitting back, a step back from everyone politically, and just kind of looking at things and how it's going and whether it's a good idea or not. And I'm glad to know that pretty much the lion's share of the audience really does appreciate that kind of coverage, because we're the only people out here that do that kind of a deal. So with that, I hope that
he did have it out for that one viewer, though. I remember he told me before the stream started, he's like, if you see that one guy in here, get him. I was like, wait a minute, what did he say again? And he told me what he said, and I was like, damn, he said he's going to publish a recording of our live stream, which is published already on YouTube. I said, damn, man, you can't let him get away with that. You can't let him talk to you like that.
So I was going to let it go, because this person wanted to call. And now I want to tell y'all this. We've been called everything under the sun politically. Like, I'll just list off some of the things. We've been called MAGA, we've been called radical leftists, we've been called communists, fascists, and everything in between. Literally all of it. We've been called all of it. And so last night, I made my opinions known on a certain thing internally inside the United States a little bit that I don't really agree with. So this person decided to email me and say that they know our playbook, and you better not try and hide, because I have it recorded, and I'm going to put it out for everyone to hear like it wasn't a live show that's still up right now. So considering that the person tried to make a threat, a pretty lame one at that, I was like, you know what, we're not going to let that one slide, and that's an instant ban for trying to threaten me over something that was my opinion. Like, you can disagree all you want, but threatening or cussing me out, that's grounds for a ban. So if that person shows up, I don't really know if they will, they are getting a ban tonight. So anyways, with that, I still got to say, outside of that little caveat and that little bit of information, I've got to thank you so much, everyone, for supporting the channel and really enjoying the show and how we do this and our really kind of neutral coverage and analysis. You know, and every once in a while, very seldomly, we will agree and disagree with things that specific administrations are doing, regardless of what political affiliation they have. And I love to know that people really do enjoy that kind of balanced and neutral coverage, because y'all's support and enjoyment of the show has made it possible for us to be out here saying this kind of stuff. And that's something that is rare to see in this world these days, because you really just get absolute lunacy and really mental decay, brain rot at this point from most other places. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. Huge thanks to you once again, Purple Gerbil. And with that, we are on to that live chat. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so the live chat question here goes to, let's see here, it goes to Judge, who says, does it change anything that the President of the United States just called Zelensky and Putin?
Can you reread that one?
They said, does it change anything that the President of the United States just called Zelensky and Putin?
Well, it doesn't really mean much. I would actually say, like, as far as I took that, shouldn't the president go and speak to our ally Zelensky first in person before he even tries to call Putin and then speak to him? Like, I know that he met in person before he became president, but now that he's president, it's a bit of a different game. You kind of have to restart everything again on an official level. And I feel like that would have been a good action to make to show that the United States does have Ukraine's best interest in mind, not the Russians. So I guess it could mean something. I guess we are finally moving towards the negotiations, possibly. But at the same time, I believe that diplomatically that was handled poorly, and surely comes off insulting to the Ukrainians, who are openly an ally of the United States and an ally of Western and American interests. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. But I do thank you so much once again for support, Purple Gerbil, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible and keep it running. And so a big thanks once again, and we are on to the next one.
You know, I feel like the phrase "keep your friends closer, but your enemies closer" was taken a little bit too literally. I think, like in the modern day situation here, I think that meant to like keep a closer eye on your enemies than your friends, and that's the way I interpreted that. That doesn't mean to like actually take a dagger and stab it in your friend and say, "Come here, enemy, come here, like we love you." Like that's not what that typically means, like the way I understand it. So maybe that'll get straightened out one of these days, or maybe not. There's no telling at this point, but one thing's for sure, we will not be just simply saying, oh, well, that's just the way it is, and that's the end of it. I'll personally, along with the enforcer, be saying this to the very end of the situation, that Ukraine should not be abandoned, ever. And I will keep saying that. I don't care what comes up. I will keep saying that because that's in American interest to make sure that Ukraine doesn't fall. But enforcer, what were you going to say?
I saw someone say, Mr. Solo Dolo say, I got no dog in the fight, and not nearly as informed as y'all, but I've heard plenty of bad things about Ukraine's president also. Listen, I got to tell you this. It's the internet. There is bad things being said about everyone, everywhere. The hot dog man took another smear campaign on us today. It backfired pretty badly. We gained I think 600 Twitter followers from it. But people are always taking shots at everyone. I mean, the internet is full of angry, venomous people. We've had personal experience with the hot dog man in particular to know that. So if you go off of the idea that you've heard bad things from other people about someone, 90% of the time I've learned that most bad things you hear about most other people are markedly untrue, for the large part, because we've been a victim of that ourselves. So saying, oh, I've heard on the internet some people are saying really bad things about the guy, it doesn't really amount to much. There's plenty of bad things being said about Putin. Is he a bad guy? Oh, hell yeah. I mean, he's a bad guy. Look at his actual actions, the things he's done. He got Navalny killed recently. He's killed pretty much all of his political opponents since he became president in the year 2000. Journalists end up dead all over Russia whenever they criticize the government. Oligarchs get killed pretty much openly by the FSB. That is a horrendous person. That is, without a doubt, a horrendous person. Now, Zelensky, on the other hand, you hear bad things about him that you really can't confirm. He's got multiple summer homes in Florida. How do you confirm that? Or better yet, the one that blatantly was untrue, everyone called was untrue, the fake receipt printed out on a printer for a Bugatti. There's stuff like that circles around that's just markedly untrue and false. And maybe there is some truth to it. Maybe he is maybe skimming a little bit off the top of actual monetary aid that's going to Ukraine, although that isn't much. But at the same time, doesn't anyone look in the mirror, though? If we're going to say that that's bad for Ukraine to do it, well, isn't it bad for Putin to pretty much run the country as his own personal piggy bank? The oligarchs make money for him. It's not the other way around. He's not there because he loves helping out the Russian people. He's there because he's got 10 mansions across Russia, across the entirety of the territory. He picks a new one each month. Like, think about that. It's like if we're going to criticize one person unfairly, it's like, if we look over at Putin, it's not really like he's any better. He's far worse in every metric. Like if
And
all
also,
of the stuff about Zelensky is true, and that's to even say if it is or isn't.
by the way, like for example, what is Vladimir Putin's net worth? Does anybody even know what that is? Because I have it pulled up here because I was curious. I was thinking, Vladimir
Billions.
Putin. What we said, millions?
Billions.
Yeah, actually, it's like 200 billion. That's his net worth, by the way. And what has Vladimir Putin done in his whole life? Did he found a company? No, he did not. Did he do anything to set up anything of value except for be in the government inside of Russia? And that's all he's done. He's been in the government, and he somehow appeared out of nowhere and took the country over. And now his net worth is $200 billion. So how do you get to be $200 billion rich without founding anything of value and just simply taking a country over? That sounds like a dictator. And once again, all the signs are there. He's a dictator. He's wiping people out that disagree with him. He keeps flip-flopping with that other fellow who keeps like flip-flopping the presidency position with to make it look like the elections are legitimate. It's just the whole thing. It's obvious the guy's a dictator. There's no question about that.
And so
for people to come in and say, like, for example, people like Lex Fridman, they want to come in and act like, oh, let's just play it fair with a dictator. And let's just play it fair like he's going to be a good fella and treat everybody right. It's like he hasn't treated anybody right. He invades foreign countries. He knocks people off. What is the objective here? To play it fair with that guy? It's like he's a devil.
And then someone said, so you're saying that they're both evil? No. Like, so what? Like, let me ask this: when has Zelensky ever had anyone offed? Like, he's had people removed from office. Everyone does that. But when has he ever offed someone? I have not heard of anyone who's even come up with that's been close to being assassinated by Zelensky. You can find an entire laundry list of people that's been assassinated by Putin. And then if we're going to go off of that, if someone has a speck of a questionable thing on them, then we can't like them. Well, hell, I mean, y'all do not want me to touch on either the current president of the United States or the former president of the United States and the things that they have done before they got in office, while they were in office, and after they got out of office. None of that looks good. Like, so if we're to use, you have to be a perfect, spotless person to be someone that we're to back up and support. Neither the current president nor the former president can anyone like and support in the United States. Because I can list off at least 10 things on each of them that they have done that I would say is absolutely abhorrent, and I'm really shocked that they even got away with it on both of them. So that it would be a little bit wild to say that, because I'm very sure that a lot of people who are asking the question, wait a minute, so Zelensky's a bad person or Putin's a nice person, or in either way, whether you like or hate Zelensky, I'm sure all of you will have your political opinions on which president you liked and you didn't like, and I could tell you, as a completely unbiased person taking a step back, both of them did things that were incredibly wrong. Like hell, like one time there were narcotics found in the White House under the last administration. There was a crypto scam pulled under the current one. Like, there's plenty of things, like those are just listing off two of them. And we can go through all of them. I'm not going to do that because then people are going to use that to take political pot shots. But you should get the point. Like, to say, oh, someone's got to be, perfect. That's ludicrous, because I don't believe anyone in the political world in any country anywhere is perfect. So to say they got to have a spotless record for us to support them, hell, we may as well just back out of supporting the political parties in the U.S. entirely and just not vote then, because I don't think there's a single person in either one of the U.S. political parties that is spotless. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. But still, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Actually, I don't believe we ever even got to the second super chat, Matthew, did we?
No.
Okay, so with that, we are on to the second one.
So the second one goes to K-Dub Janky, who's, of course, a longtime channel legend as well. And thank you very much, K-Dub, for always supporting the channel and throwing in that $50 super chat tonight. And thank you very much for the support and helping to keep the lights on. And they said, what was the most historically significant war in ancient times, in medieval times, and in modern times? And I have some ideas, but always enjoy your thought process and great channel enforcers.
And thank you so much for the support. Really interesting question. And I'll try and cut it down to being some of the most important ones. As far as ancient times, the most important ones always happen in the Punic Wars, and I believe the Second Punic Wars would be the most important one. And I would say that dang it, I forgot what the name of the battle was, but it was the one where the Romans finally defeated Hannibal Barca of Carthage. I forgot which one that was. but that would be the most important one, because if Carthage had won, that would have completely changed the fate of really all of modern history if they had won one of those battles. So I would say, in my opinion, the battles in between Carthage and the early Roman Republic were probably some of the most influential ones that ever happened in that period of history. In the medieval period, the fall of Constantinople is without a doubt the most important and defining element of that period, because that is what created the age of exploration and largely the Renaissance, which really isn't an age. That's like a big thing in the historical world, is that a lot of people view the Renaissance as its own age. It really isn't. Like, it at all. Like, it didn't really affect anyone. You know, like say the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment affected everyone. The Middle Ages and its feudal system affected everyone. But the Enlightenment, well, not really the Enlightenment, but the Renaissance really affected no one. It was just more so kind of like an artistic kind of an innovation of a sort, and a cultural innovation, but didn't really change the societal structures or anything, so it doesn't really count. But the fall of Constantinople is by far the most important thing in the Middle Ages, because that changed the face of how Europe operated, and that's what created the Age of Exploration and really the world that we know today, that we live in. Now, the most important war in the modern day, in my opinion, a lot of people are going to say World War II. Back that number up by one, it would be World War I. Without World War I, none of the modern world, culturally, that exists today would exist. And really none of the landscape that we see would exist today. The Russian Federation, as it is right now, would not exist if it was not for World War I. World War I destabilized the Russian Empire so badly, that's what allowed the Bolsheviks to get a grip and to create the Civil War. World War I is what created, in the future, Nazi Germany because of the Treaty of Versailles, and shaped the face of Europe exactly how it is now. That World War I was what bankrupted the British to start seeing them plan in about, I think it was about 30 years' time from that point, to start lopping off huge parts of the British Empire and create the independent countries we know today, like India, or for that matter, Egypt, and let's see here, what else would have been? Sudan, really, for a large part, and South Sudan, and everything else. Really, World War I is the most important conflict in the modern world, and it was the first industrial war of its kind on that scale. So that would be the most important war in the modern age for that reason. So to once again recap, ancient wars, Second Punic Wars. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the name of the battle, but it was the one, I believe, somewhere in the plains of southern Italy where they finally defeated Hannibal Barca. In the medieval era, it would have been the Siege of Constantinople and the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks around, I believe it was 1444. And then the most important war that ever happened in the modern period would have been World War I, as far as its consequences and impact. But really, every single war kind of compounded to create the next one. That's really the most interesting thing about it, is that we can always say that there was like a watershed moment, but really each war is a watershed moment in its own way and has massive changes and consequences, both good and bad, to the world and how it develops overall.